On February 22, 2025, a ray of light pierced the heavy cloud of conflict enveloping the Gaza Strip. 5 Israeli hostages, held captive since the war's outbreak in October 2023, were released by Hamas. Omer Wenkert, Omer Shem Tov, and Elia Cohen, abducted from a music festival, tasted freedom once more. Tal Shoham, seized from his kibbutz, and Avera Mengistu, held since 2014, rejoined their families. A 6th hostage, Hisham al-Sayed, was also slated for release later that day. The releases, part of a fragile ceasefire agreement, were met with a mix of relief and cautious optimism. Images of the freed hostages, some gaunt and bewildered, others smiling tentatively, flashed across screens worldwide. Their release marked a rare moment of positive development in a conflict marked by unrelenting violence and loss. Despite the joy of the individual releases, the shadow of the ongoing conflict loomed large. The fate of dozens more hostages remained uncertain, their families clinging to hope while grappling with agonizing uncertainty. The releases, while significant, represented only a small step towards a comprehensive resolution. The fragility of the ceasefire, the ongoing negotiations, and the deep scars left by the conflict served as stark reminders of the long and arduous road ahead. For the families of the released hostages, the focus shifted to healing and rebuilding their lives. For the families of those still held captive, the wait continued. A painful testament to the human cost of this seemingly intractable conflict. The release of the 5 hostages came at a price. In exchange for their freedom, Israel agreed to release over 600 Palestinian prisoners. This exchange, the 8th since the ceasefire began, was the largest single release of Palestinian prisoners to date. Among those released were 50 individuals serving life sentences for their roles in attacks against Israelis. Another 60 prisoners serving lengthy sentences also walked free. The list included 47 individuals previously released in earlier exchanges, only to be re-arrested during the recent conflict. The remaining 445 were detainees seized in Gaza since the war began. This lopsided exchange, while welcomed by Palestinians as a victory, sparked controversy within Israel. Critics, particularly from the political right, decried the move as a dangerous concession to terrorism. They argued that releasing convicted attackers would only embolden Hamas and lead to further violence. Supporters of the exchange, however, argued that it was a necessary step towards de-escalation and securing the release of the remaining hostages. They pointed out that the vast majority of those released were low-level offenders or individuals held without trial. The debate over the prisoner exchange highlighted the deep divisions within Israeli society regarding the conflict and the price of peace. It underscored the complexities of negotiating with Hamas, an organization designated as a terrorist group by Israel, the United States, and the European Union. The release of the 5 hostages unleashed a wave of emotions across Israel. For the families of those freed, it was a moment of unbridled joy and relief. Years of agonizing wait, punctuated by fleeting hopes and crushing disappointments, finally culminated in the return of their loved ones. Tal Shoham's family, overcome with emotion, called for a swift resolution to secure the release of all remaining captives. Their plea resonated with many Israelis, who shared their yearning for an end to the hostage crisis and the broader conflict. However, the joy of some was tempered by the continued anguish of others. Families of the remaining hostages, while heartened by the releases, were left grappling with agonizing uncertainty. Their pleas for information, their hopes for a similar miracle, remained unanswered. The stark contrast between celebration and despair underscored the deeply personal toll of the conflict. It served as a poignant reminder that for many, the war's end remained a distant dream, their lives held captive by uncertainty and grief. The hostage release was part of a fragile ceasefire agreement, brokered by Egyptian mediators in Cairo. The agreement, aimed at de-escalating the conflict and paving the way for broader negotiations, was fraught with challenges. The first phase of the ceasefire, set to expire on March 2, 2025, hinged on the release of all hostages in exchange for a lasting ceasefire and a partial Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Hamas, emboldened by its recent successes, demanded a full withdrawal and a lifting of the blockade as preconditions for the release of the remaining captives. Israel, wary of appearing weak and facing internal pressure to maintain a hard line against Hamas, remained reluctant to make further concessions. The far-right factions within the governing coalition vehemently opposed any further prisoner swaps, viewing it as a dangerous capitulation to terrorism. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continued to worsen. The Israeli blockade, coupled with the devastation wrought by the conflict, had left the Strip's infrastructure in ruins. The majority of the population remained displaced, struggling to survive with limited access to basic necessities like food, water, and healthcare. The international community, while condemning the violence on both sides, struggled to find a cohesive strategy to address the crisis. The United States, traditionally a staunch ally of Israel, faced growing pressure to adopt a more even-handed approach, recognizing the plight of Palestinian civilians caught in the crossfire. As the ceasefire deadline approached, the fate of the remaining hostages hung in the balance. The outcome of the negotiations would not only determine their future, but also shape the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for years to come. The world watched with bated breath, hoping for a breakthrough, yet bracing for the possibility of further violence and suffering.